on behalf of the Wolf Humanities Center, welcome to everyone to our annual symposium, which this year is on the theme of heritage and presence. My name is Jamal Ilyas. I'm the faculty director of the Wolf Humanities Center. We are, the way Wolf Humanities Center is Penn's Humanities Center, and we organize our events annually around a theme, and our theme this year is heritage. So it's actually wonderful to have this rich and varied symposium around such an important and an important theme which matters to lots of people in so many different ways. So before, my job here is to thank everyone who makes this possible. And before I do that, I'd like to actually issue, particularly because it's an issue of heritage and presence, I'd like to issue a land acknowledgement, just to say briefly that the land that this grand university stands on and the state, the Commonwealth within and city within which it stands was previously territory controlled by the Lenni Lenape or Delaware Indians. And it was taken from them using treaties that were so intentionally flawed and one-sided that if they were brought into a court today, they would not stand up to any legal standard. That being said, let me just first sort of acknowledge, I have a lot of acknowledgements, so get comfortable. So first of all, this event is organized by our postdoctoral fellows and our graduate fellows. And they are, I just named them off. So first, starting with our graduate research assistant at the center this year, Jake Nussbaum, our graduate fellows, Larissa Johnson, Max Dugan, Anna Lehr-Muser, and our Mellon postdoctoral fellows, Ionita Kostash, Richard Fadek, Margaret Gioga, Rebecca Habucha, and Peter Sorensen. The Wolf Center itself, our activities are supported by a lot of generous donors. So I would like to gratefully acknowledge the generous support of the Wolf Family Foundation, the Hershey Family Foundation, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, Dr. S.T. Lee Distinguished Lecturer and in the Humanities Fund, and the Office of the Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences at the University of Pennsylvania. This event itself has many, many co-sponsors. So again, get comfortable. First of all, Penn Libraries and the Kislak Center for Rare Books at Penn Libraries, whose wonderful room we're using right now. Also, the Andrea Mitchell Center for the Study of Democracy, the Annenberg School for Communication, the Center for Africana Studies, Center for Experimental Ethnography, Center for Latin American and Latinx Studies, the Center for Research in Feminist, Queer, and Transgender Studies, Cinema and Media Studies, the Department of Anthropology, of History and Sociology of Science, of Music, and the Graduate Program in Historic Preservation at the Weitzman School of Design. And last but not least, I'd like to thank my colleagues at the Wolf Humanities Center who have worked very hard to make this happen and are working very hard today. So Sarah Varney, Pamela Horn, and Stephen Perez. And then I want to just, as we start, hand off to my colleague, the topic director for the year.
Thanks for being here. Thank you so much, Jamal, and thank you to all the Wolf staff and to all the postdocs and graduate fellows who've organized this amazing looking lineup for the panels today. I'm really excited to hear from everybody who's going to be talking today. And I also just want to say how engaging the Wolf seminar and programming this year has been for me. And I'm looking forward to this rich day of discussions and presentations on this important topic with this wonderful array of different thinkers who are gathered together. So I'm mostly just going to introduce the panelists for this morning. And I thought before I get to that, I should just maybe talk a tiny bit about heritage, but I'm only going to talk for like 3 minutes about my own relationship to heritage, which I see as I find it a really difficult topic to think about and to have feelings about. I took over as the faculty topic director for heritage very much at the last minute because the previous person had to drop out. And I've been conscious all year that this is a theme I would never have chosen, and that from a purely personal perspective, I find it uncomfortable. I have a lot of conflicted feelings about my own heritage. I grew up in the UK as a white middle-class person in Oxford. my parents worked hard to shed their own provincial heritages and take on the borrowed glory of the sort of borrowed heritage of this medieval university. It's a town in a way like Penn, with a very big town gown divide, where it's obvious that there are particular kinds of dreaming spires, architectural and intellectual heritage, knobbly cobblestones, medieval cloisters, Cotswold stone, the legacy of Alice in Wonderland, and White said we visited, and Inspector Morse on TV, and hunting and Pims. It's obviously are a major economic industry, which bring in huge busloads of both summer visitors, tourists from all over the world, some are language students. All of that is sort of part of the heritage industry. And then, of course, that within the world of the city I grew up in, there's far less attention economically and culturally paid to all the different heritages of working class British people in Oxford, immigrant people, South Asian people, Middle Eastern people, Black British people living in the same city, of whom there are very large communities, and yet they're somehow not part of what we associate with Oxford heritage. As a kid, I associated the word heritage with the royal family, with fancy stately homes, lovingly preserved by the National Trust, and relatedly with the nationalist, racist ideas of proper Englishness that were and remain a central part of British society. All of that didn't just start with Brexit. And of course, there are parallel stories that one can tell in many, many different parts of the world, including the US. Within the UK context, you can trace the threads of heritage appropriation and heritage politicization, at least as far back as the early 17th century, when King James VI and I, a Scottish import monarch who was very conscious of the need to shore up his own hold on power in a foreign country, issued the Book of Sports in 1617, legislating about which kinds of heritage practices were legitimate under the new royal regime. We could have Morris dancing and women decorating the churches with rushes, and we couldn't have bear baiting and things like that. We couldn't have the Catholic kinds of heritage and the Puritan kinds of heritage. The Stuart monarchy, both James and his soon decapitated son Charles, made use of the discourses and practices of the oldie Britishy heritagey to try and shore up their own shaky hold on legitimacy, to push back against the suspicion of not having the right kinds of heritage. And I think that that whole question about how is heritage appropriated by powerful groups seems like a really relevant question to talk about as, in a way, an other side to what we're talking about in some of these other discussions in the panels that we're going to have today. And then the second side of why heritage makes me uncomfortable is to do with the fact that I'm a classicist. I'm in the classical studies department. And I think within that discipline, one of the most urgent questions is about, is it possible to study ancient Greece and Rome as history rather than as heritage? Can we investigate ancient Greek and Roman cultures and literatures without reinscribing the still pervasive ideas about the great civilizations of the enslaving imperial ancients as the natural heritage of white Europeans and of the white founding fathers in this country, or the glory of ancient Spartan warriors as a kind of heritage endorsement for modern forms of toxic cis-hetero masculinity? I think all of that grappling with how to distance ourselves or how to be critical about the heritage discourses have to also entail looking hard at the exclusionary training practices and structures and assumptions that are intertwined with the heritage of the discipline of classics itself. And one can tell parallel stories about some other academic disciplines as well, but it's a very, very pressing issue in classics. At the same time, in my work as a translator, I want to make ancient Greek and Roman poetry feel present, feel alive and meaningful and rhythmical, to invite reading out loud, embodiment, performance, emotions, engagement by a wide range of different readers. So I think a lot about presence, but I don't necessarily think in terms of heritage. So I've tended, these are like my two reasons why I've tended to feel like heritage is a very difficult topic for me. As we all know, claims of heritage by people from already privileged positions like me can be, that discourse of heritage can be one of the most powerful tools of oppression. But I've also been realizing much more deeply in the course of this year's WOLF discussions how enlightening it could be not to pretend we can throw out the idea of heritage and the problems of heritage, but to stay with and wrestle with these four questions: how structural and physical violence can be associated with heritage, and also how there can be competing claims of heritage, whether over texts or cultural practices or spaces or identities. Heritage means something very different for those whose identities, whose lived realities, communities, and presence have been threatened and erased. And I'm hoping to learn a lot more in the course of the day about how necessary heritage can be as a framework of shared bodily sensation and experience, especially for people whose heritage may have been erased or threatened. How fundamentally the experience of embodied social life and practices can be shaped by a set of feelings that connect communities and connect the present to the past. I'm hoping to learn also more about the thorny theoretical problems of contested and fraught or lost heritages, and how to recover the heritage of marginalized peoples. So I'm super excited about this morning's discussion in particular, because Penn's problematic position in West Philadelphia is so important and something that so many people in the neighborhood think about all the time, but there have been so very few explicit public discussions at Penn about it. I think this is a really rare opportunity, and I hope it'll lead to more dialogue in the future. So I'm really grateful to be here. I'm grateful to the panelists, and I'd love to welcome our speakers. So I'm just going to tell who all our speakers are, and then we'll look forward to hearing from them. So the panel is Beyond the Institution, Perspectives from West Philadelphia and the Problems with Talking About Heritage at Penn. So we have Wanda Goss and Maria Lyles, residents of the University City Townhomes in West Philadelphia, who are facing displacement due to real estate development. They're fighting for preservation of the low-income housing at the University City Townhomes and in their neighborhood. Naomi Richardson is an Africologist, humanities facilitator, researcher, documentarian, and teaching artist. She has a keen interest in media and other traditional and non-traditional art forms that lead to knowledge creation. As a facilitator in media arts, her purpose is to research and document the histories, oral histories, of ordinary persons and lived and living experiences. Her quest is to preserve these histories so those unfamiliar with them can learn about and from them. Over the past 17 years, she's been granted the opportunity to bring the process of storytelling using documentary genres to understand communities in Camden County, Chester County, and Philadelphia. She believes that making community-based art opens up the way for participants to engage and thrive within their respective communities and be the voice of change. Working through the medium of documentary with various communities allows her to share the skills she has acquired over time. She incorporates in her projects her knowledge of the histories, social contexts, politics, and cultures of people of the African diaspora. Past works include her thesis, The Perception of the Concept of Culture in Saint-Martin, Saint-Martin. And she also has a documentary in progress on being Black, colored, and Catholic in Philadelphia. We also have Christopher Rogers, an educator and cultural worker from Chester, PA. He serves as Public Programs Director for the Paul Robeson's House and Museum, where he's volunteered since 2015. He's a fifth-year doctoral student in the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education, where he studies neighborhood storytelling practices in West Philadelphia. He served on the National Steering Committee for Black Lives Matter at school, supporting movements for racial justice in K through 16, it seems like a lot of years, education by mapping, indexing, mapping, indexing, and expanding access to identity-affirming, justice-oriented educational materials. And then we have Dr. Crystal Strong, an assistant professor in Black Studies in Education at Rutgers University. Her research and teaching use ethnographic, participatory, and multimodal methods to investigate youth and community activism, global Black social movements, and the role of education as a site of struggle in the African diaspora. Dr. Strong is helping to build the MOVE Activist Archive, a counter-archive of MOVE history and collective memory. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming our panel for this morning.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'm Crystal Strong, and I'm really proud to be a part of this panel. I'm proud to be connected to, very deeply connected to many of the people on this panel, and I'll be serving as a moderator and also a presenter. And I think I have to give great credit to the symposium and Jake in particular for recognizing the need to open up a conversation about heritage and presence at Penn with the contradictions of talking about heritage and presence at Penn. And this panel, I think, is going to offer us some important historical and contextual understanding about what that means. I think this panel will also show us the kinds of grassroots and community-based practices that allow us to think about heritage and presence, but also absence, dislocation, and implication of this institution and the very kinds of processes that make having this conversation so difficult. But I think one of the things that is also going to be an outcome of this conversation is that we will see pathways to participate in the kind of reclamative projects, kind of insurgent projects that everyone here is a part of, that offers us new possibilities for presence and for community and community's interests being central to how institutions like Penn exist. And so I think we should just get started. What do you all think? Good. All right, so we are going to start with the Miss Wanda and Miss Maria, who are two powerhouse organizers within the University City Townhomes community and in the Save the UC Townhomes Coalition, which I'm so honored to be a part of. And so we are going to talk about this ongoing and very urgent fight to save what we have now called the people's townhomes, and to think about that struggle and specifically Penn's implication in that fight, and by extension, all of our implication in that fight. So can we go to the slides? And I think we thought that we would start with a short film that kind of brings us all into the center of this fight. And then we will have a conversation about what this community means to residents and also what work is still to be done. So let's see this. Do you press play? There we go.
University bulldozed 2,700 households. We're not here to say not again, not in our name. Save the UC Townhomes. Save the UC Townhomes. Stop gentrification. Stop gentrification. Hey, hey, ho, ho. These developers have got to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho. These developers have got to go.
So let's have the ancestors join us in this walk. I invite you to join me to see them standing around and with these residents before we move.
We are taking these streets. We are taking these streets. Whose streets? Our streets. Whose streets? Our streets. Hey, hey. Ho, ho. Degentrifiers got to go. Hey, hey. Ho, ho. Degentrifiers got to go. Hey, hey. Ho, ho. Degentrifiers got to go. Shut it down.
going to do, we could have prepared.
That's right.
But we not prepared. They just sprung this on us a year ago.
They have taken everything. They've taken our children's schools, they've taken the homes, they've taken Brewery Town, all of Philadelphia is being gentrified, and people are being displaced.
The townhomes are the literal last sign of Black people in this so-called university city.
You can't get housing. You can't even buy a goddamn house in this community no more.
This is the Black Bottom. The University of Pennsylvania sits in the Black Bottom. I have never referred to this place as University City.
Come on! As long as we draw breath, we will protect this community, our families, and our children.
And also, we deserve respect. We are somebody, and we do matter.
Our demands are to stop the demolition, give us more time, make immediate repairs, and to provide just compensation.
Still get chills watching this. This was the first big protest we had. And we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the start of at least the sort of protest part of the fight. But before we get into really taking up the clear urgency of the fight to save not just the people's townhomes and also affordable housing in West Philadelphia, but also the existence of Black, brown, poor people in West Philadelphia, we want to begin by really grounding ourselves in community and in your community. And so I'd love to open up with Miss Wanda. I know, Miss Wanda. So I've heard that your family was one of the oldest families in West Philadelphia. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about where you grew up in the city and what your parents did for a living.
You know, my other student, I was living when I was 11. I went to the town.
So how did you and Miss Lyles meet?
School district.
Do you want to talk a little bit about how you connected and what your work in the school district of Philadelphia?
Children that were there.
Make sure everybody can hear you.
No, we both met. We both in the school district. There you go. From Tyler.
So
We have educators in our midst.
Charles Drew,
Yeah.
38. That's the one they tore down.
Yeah. And university. They
Yeah.
turned that down too. Prosody.
Oh, University High School, yeah.
Yeah.
So you were teachers at school.
Well, I was a volunteer. I worked in the classes, helped out and the teachers with the children. So did Wanda, she was NTA though.
Elementary school.
Yeah, elementary school. Mine went far back as Hannah, which got turned into Guyan as Bluford. And I actually followed my kids basically from when they first went into school at elementary to all the way to when she graduated out of high school. And then worked with the teachers in their classrooms or worked with other teachers who need help or assistance in their classroom. And we met actually, both of us working, doing the same thing. You know, wherever they needed help, we were pulled in. So, I mean, I enjoyed it. They had all kinds of activities there that they don't have anymore. Unity is no longer there. I don't know, the education is so changed. Before, I mean, there was regiment. Kids went to school, and they did homework and stuff like that. Now, yeah, I mean, if they go to school, they have to worry about their lives, which is totally different than what we had before. They have to worry about their safety, because I don't think the school district ever is really grasped that piece. I mean, it's just so bad, for lack of a better word to change, but it's just, I mean, I think our children are wasting away now. They're not giving the opportunities that could have been when they were going to school every day, getting classes in geography, science, excuse me, English. Some of them now they're coming out, they can't even read, can't write. Yeah, I mean, that was never done before.
So what I'm hearing from both of you, and I want to make sure people, especially if you're not familiar with the school, like school histories and even local histories, they're talking about schools that they were integral parts of that no longer exist, right? That either were closed, torn down, or turned into something else. And so this is really precious history and memory that Ms. Wanda and Mrs. Lyles are offering to us that I think helps us really understand the stakes for community, right? And so I'm wondering, Ms. Maria, we heard quite a lot from you in terms of what you remember about what school used to be like and what, you know, many students and families are facing now. I'm wondering if Ms. Wanda, you could talk a little bit about your own experience from then. I know you still see many of your students around town, and I'm wondering if you could just sort of talk about.
Okay. I wasn't at Drew when they knocked it down. I was, McCall. That's where I come from there.
Okay.
It is different. For them, they didn't build nothing up yet. It's just not the same as it used to be. People are not the same. They mean.
You said they're mean.
Yeah, like me. I mean to the kids. They say the kids say it, but I'll be doing it for them for their education.
Right.
And you got a lot of kids that recognize you too when they're out in the street.
Yeah.
Stop and say hello to you. They recognize, oh, Miss Wanda, how you doing? Or they don't say, this guy.
And I know you also have a long memory and, oh, please continue, Ms. Wanda.
I used to work for Altman.
Worked for Altman, which is the owner of the University City Townhomes, who is attempting to sell it and displace residents. So I'm wondering if we can pick up with you again, Mrs. Lyles, and talk about your own connection to West Philadelphia. You know, can you tell us a little bit about the kind of community that you remember, and also the kind of, what this community was like, the businesses, neighborhoods that don't exactly look the same. I think, as folks who have lived through so many transitions in this community, I think you have such resources to sort of share with those of us here who may not be from here, to understand what this community has been like before the quote unquote university city as we know.
I originally come from 6013 Media Street in Philadelphia, PA. Where I was born at was there. And how can I say, the people who were living in that area were, first of all, predominantly white and mixed, more white than mixed, and they were German, and they had more nurses and doctors who lived in that area. As we got older, there was a transition where they moved further out, and the people who moved in were mostly were foreigners, and they were close. our neighborhoods had Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, and the businesses really got involved with helping them out. When they had trips and stuff like that, the businesses would help with the lunches, the snacks, and they would all together come together to rent a bus for them to go on their trips. They were really involved. Now you can barely find any business that will reach out that way. When Mr. Brown, who used to own the corner store, when he died and it changed business, it was the neighborhood started dying, literally. People started moving out, and I mean, there was a huge change in the neighborhood. There were more gangs. They were coming in, Lansdowne, Edgewood Street. We used to have football games on Edgewood Street. And everybody in the neighborhood would come together, don't matter whether, and you had some that didn't even live in the neighborhood that come down there and sit there on people's porches and stuff like that, and they would just watch the game. When the neighborhood changed over, what ended up happening is that all that stopped. And mostly gangs took over. You had Edgewood Street gang, you had Redfield gang, and don't get me wrong, I mean, the gangs weren't that good, but you had some gangs that were. You had, what was the one, Black Panther? They came and they would help out with, when we had crime issues in the area, they would kind of like watch the neighborhood. And they were trying to get other people, recruit other people to help with that part. And that terminology changed. And now, I don't know whether they're still, I had to keep up with that. So I know their philosophy isn't the same. They have variations of that philosophy. I went myself to a Catholic school in Rosalina, and then went to West Catholic. St. Rosalina now it's closed down right now because of the financial issues and because of the neighborhood, because of how the neighborhood's turning. The money is not there. People can't afford Catholic schools anymore. A schooling.
St. Agatha's a condo now, 38 Spring Garden. That's where I went to elementary school. This is different. Outcome of things is different.
So I think what we're hearing is a beloved community that existed, right? And exists still. Although we're also hearing so many ways that that beloved community and its institutions, cultural institutions, educational institutions, economic institutions have been seized and transformed, right? And I'm thinking we can pivot now to the University City Townhomes. And also talking about how both of you come to the University City Townhomes. I understand that there is a connection with how you both came to be longtime residents at the University City Townhomes. And I'm wondering if you can walk us through that, but also talk to us about the community that existed and exists at the University City Townhomes before you got notification that you would have to leave. Let's talk about leading up to that point.
Wanda worked there, actually worked in the office. And we both worked in the school at Drew. And what happened was that she knew I was going through some stuff with trying to get, because I was in a shelter. And from the shelter, I went with my sister over to Spring Garden. After there's a lot of stuff that happened. My brother and my mother, and they died. So over a period of time, our family was going through some stuff. And I reached out to Wanda to let her know that I was looking for a place to live. Well, she recommended me to be in the University Townhomes, helped me fill out an application. So she got me in there, literally. So I'm grateful. And at the time also, I was going some stuff with my daughter because she has health issues. She was on dialysis for a minute, and then from there, kidney transplant. So I was going through a lot of stuff. And Wanda literally came to our rescue, our family's rescue. So, I mean, it was really, 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 we appreciate each other. Sometimes.
Sometimes.
Anyway, we kept we kept close. I mean, we kept within what you call, because she lived in the second regiment or area.
In the middle.
Yeah, and I'm on the third one, and we still kept in contact. Even our children, my daughter and her daughter are still friends. You know, even now. So I mean, that was good. I mean, when we first came into it, I mean, we were grateful that we got the housing, but it was a good transition because people had to get to know you. You know, you were like outsiders. Yes, Lord. But we eventually stuck it out, and with all the stuff that was going on, the fact that the hospitals were close by, transportation was easy, getting us to back and forth, thank you very much, back and forth to the hospital, and even sometimes walking distance, depending upon where we had to go. So, I mean, it was a gem of a place to be in. So we were thoroughly grateful with that situation. Our church, right there at 38th and Chestnut, St. Agnes St. James. So it was just really a beautiful place, the center of everything for us. And so as years went by, and we were given notice to vacate, or not vacate, but that HUD was no longer going to support us anymore. Yeah. I was a little nervous because
I thought it was a joke.
well, that's right, because University of Penn has been after them for a long time. They've been trying to get that property for a long time. And at that time, that's when the father was still alive, right? Yeah, he was very much attached to the residents, meaning he was very family oriented. When he passed is when all this stuff started spiraling down. And we were given notice that they were no longer, HUD was no longer going to be picking us back up, supporting. So we were like, we were a mess. And we were all wondering what we're going to have to do, go to shelters or be homeless, you know, and we had no idea. And then I think one of the ladies was talking about, oh, I've been this way before. I've had this before. I don't want them coming knocking at my door saying that we have to get out and be evicted. I mean, there was a lot of stress going on there, even now, still going on. Altman supposedly recognized not a solution was Triad. These people were agencies that came in who were supposed to help us find housing. They were supposed to give us we give them an assessment about our situation and then help us towards that. Well, that didn't happen, especially that first year. That didn't happen. We didn't get any connection unless you reached out to them. And even then, you weren't given, at least for me, you weren't given adequate help. So we literally were doing it on our own, looking it up. Then we had to worry about our vouchers. We were trying to get our vouchers. I mean, we were thoroughly stressed out. We were thoroughly stressed out. And so when they actually really got involved was the second year, where you had actually somebody, Triad, come to University Townhouses office, and they were assigning people to come in to have them sit down and assess again. Don't ask me what happened to the first assessment. And find out what we needed or whatever, what kind of housing we wanted or what apartment we wanted. And that was kind of slow pickup, but it happened. And the thing is that the houses and apartments they were showing us was not really adequate, especially for people who have mobility issues or a handicap or needed somebody in the household to help out. Those issues weren't even addressed, I'm gonna be honest, they weren't. The people who left, I think they left out of fear. I mean, they figured they had to be out of there, you know, and they didn't want to be thrown out, so they found their homes and they left, which ended up leading us. I mean, we had a lot of action to help try to stay there. We eventually ended up getting vouchers that were, I think the name of the vouchers. Enhanced, thank you so much. Enhanced vouchers that were supposed to keep us placed as long as the building is up.
So what I'm hearing from you, Miss Maria, and of course, what I know from being in conversation with you all and struggle with you all for over a year now, is the immense violence of displacement, the emotional trauma of displacement. One of the chants that we all often say in our actions is people over profit, right? Yeah. And part of what we see in this case is how the profit motive of taking this prime real estate in the middle of Penn and Drexel, this so-called university city, means removing the community that has already been there
For years.
For years. And so, but also not providing the materials for people to move to a place that is acceptable, right? The options that the residents are being shown are not acceptable. They're not accessible. Right. And so I'm thinking now we can talk about a little bit more about the incredible resistance that residents have led to fight this displacement, right? And I'm hoping the slides work here. I'm asking somebody.
There you go.
Okay, so I don't know if you can see these or if you can turn a little bit to help walk everyone here through some of the important milestones in the resistance to save the UC Townhomes. This is an image from, you know, the action that you saw on the video. But this is, what are we looking at here, Miss Maria and Miss Wanda?
Oh, encampment. This is the encampment. Where we're making a stand, basically. We have a majority of the residents that are coming out. Some of them are camped in there. And we have a table over here where there's information for what we're going through, so they'll be aware. And it wasn't just, what the happy part of it is that it wasn't just us. We had people in the neighborhood get involved.
Came from another.
Yes, and it was beautiful. That was beautiful. And the residents who may not at that time before weren't close, it literally drew us closer. And we got to know each other more. So those who didn't know each other before then were getting to know each other and know about what was going on.
So let's go to the next slide, because these really paint a picture of a historic encampment that got national coverage and that became a model for fighting against displacement, not just here in the city of Philadelphia, but also around the country and around the world.
I love this. Yeah, we're all sitting down there, talking to each other, getting to know each other, and fighting for the same cause.
There's Miss Maria and Miss Wanda, the Philly.
Yeah, that's what we're about to go to the World Series.
There were a number of volunteers who camped out, including the residents, in solidarity.
We camped out and I got bit by all those mosquitoes.
It wasn't easy.
It sure wasn't.
We had activities for the children. Gigi was phenomenal with bringing the kids together and creating arts and crafts, teaching them how to skateboard. But a lot of kids would have never got that learning.
And Gigi is a Penn student and one of a small but very powerful contingent of students who have been standing in solidarity with the townhomes from the beginning. Look at Miss Wanda and Miss Maria. We ain't going nowhere.
That's right.
And so we are going to come back to the townhomes in our conversation. We are going to hear from some of our other speakers, but I want to have us all thank Miss Maria and Miss Wanda for sharing. I think it's important for you all to know that this fight is not over. Penn students, you know, after this encampment, which lasted 31 days, last semester, Penn students held a 38-day encampment outside of College Hall, demanding that Penn act to stop the displacement of Black and low-income families from the neighborhood. And right now, as we speak, Drexel students are on day 4 of an occupation of the main building on campus at 32nd and Chestnut to advocate for the preservation of the townhome. So the fight is not over. And before we leave here, we'll hear more about how to support that fight. And so now I would love to turn it over to Naomi. And hopefully the slides can come up. You just have to, with power, press the one going to the right. The second one.
Middle.
Okay. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
And I have to say,
Yeah.
so I came here with an intent to talk about, and I'm going to read because I'm not extemporaneous. So let me acknowledge that. I prepared, so I'm going to read. Okay, so if you would bear with me. Rain.
Go ahead, I got you.
When I chose this title, I thought, I think it was the ancestors talking to me, and I, as I sit here, I'm thinking, how does all that I'm going to say fit in? But we are talking about contested terrain. So I will attempt to speak on, and can you hear me? I see heads nodding. Nice, thank you. Okay. This good? Better? Okay, thank you. I will attempt to speak on or about interests, works, research, and documentation by community members that tends to lead to unearthing the lived Indigenous African-American experiences of being in community. And I'm using the word in community because that's what they experience living in those townhomes, being in community. And the threats and conflicts that ejects them out of community. These type of experiences fuel the quest to tell, document, conserve, and preserve. It is those who live the experience and the descendants who overhear, overheard, or who ask curious questions in order to understand what occurred before they came on the scene. I assume the responsibility to publicize, make visible. I'm going to take this off and I hope I'll be all right. Make visible what they know of the experiences. It entails referencing several projects done or produced through the Scribe Video Center, Precious Places, and Muslim Voices projects. These projects afforded me the opportunity to co-produce, learn, and document these experiences
through facilitation as the humanities scholar, and which I will now reference as examples of representation of cultural heritage. To do so, I will first address how the discourse is framed in the literature that comes out of academic spaces. It tends to inform policies, but for me, raises the question as to whether policies inform practices and to what extent in this context. In the context of Penn. I'll demonstrate through the selected projects. But first, before I delve into the literature, that is the articles that inform my thoughts, I would like to draw our attention to terms that scholars, theorists who write about the topic use in conjunction with the concept of heritage. Look at those terms sitting up there. I won't articulate them, but I will allow you to look, which you probably were consuming them all along. So I'll give you a few seconds to look and take them in. Narratives. Intangible, tangible. Traditions, values. These terms, among others, shape the discourse in the literature and academic setting and may not be part of the lexicon used by persons, workers in community, or practitioners whose quest is to tell and preserve their lived narratives. For example, Hangzhou, that's my next slide. Let's see. For example, Decoration has a policy that a development policy that positions culture at the center. And then Joe Watkins, an anthropologist, as well as a member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, observes that Indigenous people have a right to maintain, control, protect, and develop their cultural heritage, traditional knowledge, and traditional expressions. So does cultural heritage have the ability to bring about solutions for the oppressed, deprived? Let's broaden that. The betterment of humanity in its entirety. Speaking of everyone, because I think we all could dig into some pain. And in particular, those who produce the tangible and intangible that has the potential to create economic opportunity or maintain a sense of peace and balance. An additional concern is about policy, because as Sigrid van der Alwera and Aniek Schram noted in their article, Cultural Heritage. I have it out of order. I won't do that. A tool for development. Maybe I should do that again, but hopefully you'll see the, I should. All right. So cultural heritage policies, a tool for development, discourse, or harmony. I'd be effective. That is the policy aspect link. And I wonder if I understood correctly, if it should be looked at as just policy discourse. In this context. Of sustainable development. Likewise, I think, I'd like to ask again, why do discussion? With that, I turn to the import of such said discussion for those in community and those working to restore and create in community. Why? Because Aurero and Scrum observe that the valuing of culture, cultural heritage, can be perceived as a hindrance to economic agendas. Resultingly, cultural heritage will be valued differently by those who have lived the experience or direct descendants, or if we speak of collective history of the living. And those who create in community. In comparison to those who do not have that bond with the objects, artifacts, spaces, buildings, dances, texts, books, and memory or memories. What descendants or the creators value? Is it stemming from Aurora and Scrum who identify it as intrinsic value of values, historic values, and aesthetic values? What are we gonna say? Because if we look at the townhomes, I'm sure when they designed those townhomes, when they did, they were pleasing to the eyes of those that designed them. I suggest that the response includes the values, name, plus. I should add emotion to that. And it's a resounding yes. And they very likely understand, so those in community very likely understand how perpetuating the existence of space, for example, will and can lead to living in community. Living in community has the likelihood to lead to the producing of intangible aspects of cultural heritage. Federico. Then Zerini. He should be an L, actually. His article, Intangible Cultural Heritage, the Living Culture of Peoples, presents another concern when he uses the term cultural prevacation. The outcome, the imposition of certain cultural models over others, a valuing issue. He sees it as contributing to the suppression, the subverting those who with knowledge and know-how, ability to pass it on to those behind, the youngest, and even the in-between ones, are those who don't know anything about the situation. A greater challenge for those ejected out of in-community, I contend, that's adding to the concern is Watkins' perspective. So Watkins' perspective on the role of intentional actors. Nonetheless, he directs our attention to what he understands heritage to be comprised of: property, that is passed on from previous generation, tangible and intangible. That in turn shape who we are and how we interact with the world around us. Or perceive the world. The idea that heritage is property and is intangible and tangible is reinforced by Watkins, who points to the role that the inheritors play in preserving, etc. Then there's Laura Jean Smith, who questions or wonders if the approach to preservation is outdated. Laura Jean, let's see if I could find her. Further, the role of the inheritor is not a given. So Anna Carlson contends that there's room for a new approach to the dialogues, and it requires taking into account what communities perceive and value. Carlson derives her position from her work among Buddhists in community. Another problem that she identified relates to conservation and permanence. Along with all the discussion, what is of importance? I think it is the valuing of the cultural heritage. Because when aesthetic values compete with historic values, people are ejected out of in-community spaces. I've selected these projects because they are perceived as precious and valuable, and community members are working diligently to preserve, perpetuate, and tell and document their personal and other community members' knowledge about them. They capture what it means to be in community, not only during life, Ife, but after. They speak to loss, brokenness, the difference in valuing. These documentaries become tools for learning about cultural heritage and strategies employed to create space in unwelcoming spaces or situations. They draw attention to why the creators, bearers, descendants, inheritors, advocates need to be involved in policy creation, which then governs whether what community people deem valuable receives a marker or is preserved, conserved. Because in the end, policy stances centered in narrowly defined perspectives are likely to perpetuate stances that do not embrace all of humanity. Preservation and conservation governs perpetuation of the tangible and the intangible, whether represented as artifacts, materials, spaces, structures, memories, captured in books, music, dances, or other formats to capture or present. So I present as example, and I made a decision not to show any of these films, because it's my urge that you should go and put.
Scribe Video Center.org, Google, it's all available on Vimeo. You can get them, please do.
So
On demand.
let me explain my reason. So I present examples, King on the Avenue, which was done in 2009. Morris Science Temple, Branches to Philadelphia, Rooted in Peace, 2014. It was done by Temple 11. Charles Albert Tinley, Here Am I, Send Me, 2016. St. Peter Claver, Mother Church of Black Catholics in Philadelphia. Let us pray, let us pray. 2018. Beyond the Sunset, the story of Green Lawn Cemetery, 2019. Pyramid Club and Studio 1517, 2022. These documentaries were produced for the intrinsic value and historic value. And as Joe Watkins observed, regardless of whether it is tangible or intangible, cultural heritage reflects the human aspect of our communities that shape who we are and how we interact with the world around us. Why? Cultural heritage, acknowledge, maintains a sense of peace and balance. When there's imbalance, I won't finish what I thought, because I don't think I want to put that word out there. But we can imagine what happened. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we'll turn over the floor to Ms. Rogers.
How much time should I? Minutes. Okay. All right, thank you. So I did have some slides. You'll see the slides come up soon. But I think it's, an opportunity to kind of respond to what's been offered in the conversation as well. So I'm gonna kind of deviate a little bit. First and foremost, I want to say it's 11:03 right now, which also means that the press conference, which is happening right at 32nd and Chestnut, for the Drexel students that are protesting both, for the Save the UC Townhomes around the attack against Chinatown led by the 76ers, the work of fossil-free Penn, who led the 38-day encampment, and the work of climate justice locally and beyond. That work is happening right now. I want to say if you have Instagram, you can go to Save UC Townhomes, and it probably is live. So while I'm talking, pull out your phones, go there, send it to people. Oh, also Drexel for Justice, which is, I was in DC yesterday, I had to spell Drexel, but I'm pretty sure y'all know how to spell Drexel. So find it, please share it. Let's, continue to spread the word, because action and resistance is ongoing. And many times it's not enough just to do an acknowledgement. We need to participate and be engaged in it. All right. So just from hearing the stories today, I decided I'm going to read a little from my dissertation today. I'm doing something? Oh, eventually. I'm gonna read a little bit from my dissertation today, which I'm supposed to be working on, but I always get caught up in stuff. But I will say, when I heard the talk about the townhomes and what those relationships meant, it brought me back to the work of social psychiatrist Mindy Fuller, right? And she has this term what she calls root shock. And in particular, she uses this research to look at the destruction of Black emotional ecosystems through through what she calls serial forced displacement. So I want to kind of give some context to this experiences that were shared through a little bit of how she sort of talks about root shock and what it means for communities. Because when we talk about how the schools and behavior in schools and community behavior has changed today versus how it was when there was more a sense of social cohesion, that is directly connected, a direct outcome, a consequence of social policy, right? So I want to just read that just a quick second, right? Root shock at the level of the individual is a profound emotional upheaval that destroys the working model of the world that had existed in the individual's head. Root shock undermines trust, increases anxiety about letting loved ones out of one's sight, destabilizes relationships, destroys social, emotional, and financial resources, and increases the risk for every kind of stress-related disease, from depression to heart attack. Root shock leaves people chronically cranky, barking a distinctive croaky complaint that their world was abruptly taken away. Root shock at the level of the local community, be it a neighborhood or something else, ruptures bonds, dispersing people to all directions of the compass. Even if they manage to regroup, they are not sure what to do with one another. People who are near are too far. People who are far are too near. The elegance of the neighborhood, each person in his social and geographic slot, is destroyed. And even if the neighborhood is rebuilt exactly as it was, it wouldn't work. Restored geography is not enough to repair the many injuries to the mazeway, which is sort of is a way of how we understand and move through the world, understand what creates our best form of survival, right? Without getting too much into it. And my sort of expanding on that, right? So the importance of root shock is this collectively felt character within Black communities, especially as she uses the condition to explore the impact of the sweeping displacement field project of U.S. Negro removal, or some might say urban renewal. She makes the case that within her research, she identifies more than 1,600 Black communities that have faced demolition and destruction, underwritten by state-sponsored urban renewal projects. And of course, obviously, what's underneath that, right, is we need to talk about the idea, the myth of University City is a part of that project, right? So while some may think urban renewal is just happening in the 1950s to the 1970s, Fullerlove's research expands its terrain into preceding and succeeding projects. Utilizing the more expansive timescale set between 1916 and 2010, Fullerlove identifies dominant policies such as segregation, redlining, urban renewal, planned shrinkage, and catastrophic disinvestment, deindustrialization, mass criminalization, gentrification, the Hope 6 sort of reconstitution of what we call public housing, and the foreclosure crisis. Those are just in that timeline, means why we can see the mass displacement of Black communities and Black neighborhoods. So I want to give that context because I feel like it's important that when we see the sort of like interpersonal relationships, or we even think about the violence that we may notice that is all over the news in terms of like gun violence within Philadelphia. We got to talk about how our urban policy, the ways our neighborhoods are disinvested, abandoned, not allowed the supports and resources as part of just the everyday status quo, is part of how we get to where we are today. And I think it's important to just remind that because we kind of we can sometimes get caught at looking just at the people as they are and not thinking about the legacy of decisions, or what George Lipschitz says, the cumulative, collective, and don't forget that it's continuing forces that bring us into this moment. All right, now back to my slides a little bit. All right. So I think one of the things I really wanted to plug today is, so I'm the program director at the Paul Robeson House and Museum. We just finished up a book project. Well, it published in 2022 called How We Stay Free, Notes on a Black Uprising, howwestayfree.com. You can go see all the details and learn about how to access it. But the book was a way of continuing our work that we do at the Paul Robeson House and Museum, even in a time where we had to sort of like close the doors to the building, do the health and safety guidance, right? I hope many people in this room are familiar with Paul Robeson, one of our 20th century's greatest entertainers across all races, but made a commitment through his art to act as a tool for social change. And his art was a commitment to the struggle. So as we, honor his legacy, and also Eslanda Robeson, his partner, who's very much so part of his legacy as well, we wanted to commit to say that in this time where we're experiencing one of the most historic racial justice mobilizations in this country's history, we need to be able to lift up those stories. And that's where this book project really, starts out from. And I love the wonderful words from Christina Heatherton, who wrote a blurb for the book. And the collection, the anthology, was really about speaking to the organizers that were there on the front lines, and not just the organizers who are leading protests, but those who are, writing into this moment, those who are creating art within this moment, and all the, creative means of resistance that people both reflect on what's happening, but also form visions about what's to come. So the collection is about 200 or something pages. Another thing that was incredibly, incredibly important to us was that we added into the appendix a number of the manifestos and visions and demands that came out of 2020, because we recognized there's always the forget machine that's at work, right? That every year they want you to start over as if like last year you didn't make the same demand as last year you didn't realize that this was a continually unfinished project. And they want you to say, oh, well, you got to go back. What are you asking for this time? You know what I'm saying? And how dehumanizing that is. So we wanted to make sure that we preserved as much as we could of those demands and that vision and put it into the book. With this short time that I have here, I think one of the things that's really important for me to do as we're here to talk about heritage is every time I start to, I talk about the book, I always come back to the dedication. And the dedication is a collective dedication. Of course, the project is led by myself as project manager, alongside my co-editor, Faja Muhammad. We also had Jared Michael Lowe, who was an editorial assistant, and Jasmine Combs, also an editorial assistant. But the project is really made up by the voices that put their voices into the project, but also the community of freedom fighters that we were trying to give this back to. So with that, we created a collective dedication. And I really want to make this a call and response amongst folks here in the room so that we can kind of like begin to lift this up. Because as we talk about practicing heritage, it is a participatory, project, right? So I'm gonna give some prompts as I go through this, and I want folks, folks on the panel too, feel free to respond. all right? So the editors of this anthology, in solidarity with the community of contributors that made this project possible, offer this special collective dedication. We honor those who have transitioned, some in 2020, but also before, from whom we have inherited the struggle. So this is a moment to say, those of us, people we have lost, those ancestors who influence us today, this is an opportunity to name those folks in this room right now. So I want to give a second for us to be able to do that. Yeah, Paul Robeson. Anybody else? Linda Richardson was one name that came up. Anybody familiar? Well, Uptown Theater. Shout out to Linda Richardson. Yes. Others. Hey, we ain't getting that man no names out here. I'll talk to you later about that one. He certainly influenced us to fight though, right? And let's go to the next one. We honor those who may be currently locked inside or standing trial, recognizing that our road to liberation is bound with their freedom. Mumia Abu-Jamal. Also want to give a shout out to Rochelle McGee, Jamil Al-Amin. All right, I want more, but I'm gonna talk to y'all after this. We lift up the names and lives of our next generation, those newly entering this world, to whom we will pass the baton to continue this worthy work. These are people who are younger, next generation, that we want to name and say, this world is going to be yours someday, or it is yours now. So, yes, thank you. Emery. UC Townhomes. Skate to Liberate click. Shout out. Yeah, so I think it's important, like the book is about those, it's about naming and recognizing that community, that we are in community. And in that community, in that bond, in that connection, we have power. And how we leverage that power is critically important. So let me see what else I got in these slides before my time's up. So I will say that, you know, one of the critical pieces that is here that also features Crystal Strong is a piece about the Black Philly Radical Collective, which is incredibly influential and I think really set the blueprint with their demands in the war on Black Philadelphia now. 13 demands that are really setting a precedent for what it means to build an abolitionist, not just Philadelphia, but an abolitionist world. You know, so I really encourage everyone to engage with them. And then we kind of move kind of closer in a little bit, right? One of the things that's not within the book itself, but is certainly influenced by the sort of breadth and depth of relationships, including the Black Philly Radical Collective, is the formation of Police Free Penn, which is here, which starts here in like around June 2020, through a bunch of, you know, Zooms and Signal chats and just a number of Penn affiliated folks who asked themselves the question, how am I accountable to the sort of like current of struggle that's happening, that surrounds us? And what does that mean for what we should be doing? Particularly when we're at a $20 billion, that's probably like before interest nowadays, a $20 billion institution that has the largest private police force in the state that also doesn't pay taxes to the city. So please engage with Police Free Penn. And lastly, I'll say that, you know, it's important to know that the book, Police Free Penn, Black Philly Radical Collective, is only the beginning, right? We recognize that bold actions and courageous protests, threatening the status quo, is necessary, just like we're seeing with Drexel for Justice today. And I hope you already have looked that up. We must reject the light concessions being offered along with our proposed reforms that do not significantly alter our conditions. We offer these demands as an abolitionist vision that we believe may unite us within our rage and yearning for a new way. This is directly lifted from the Police Free Penn sort of opening manifesto. But it speaks that there's still a lot that we need to touch, right? And there's dialogue is not going to get it done, right? There's confrontation that needs to happen, right? We need to be creative in our actions, think and be bold, and continue to do things that force people to confront the reality of human suffering that exists all around us. And with that being said, you know, the book is called How We Stay Free, because I think like the opening sentence, it's like freedom is not a destination, it's a process, which echoes the work of Tony K. Bambara, who was that scribe. Yes, Angela Davis as well, right? This commitment. Look, it's always happening. I'm gonna hold you off, brother, but I got you. So the idea of how we stay free was saying that when we commit ourselves to this struggle of transforming the world into a just place, we have already claimed our sovereignty, claimed our freedom within that process. It is not something that you like. If you return to even legacies of enslavement, you did not become free when you just arrived in Philadelphia. You became free when you decided it's time for me to go. You know what I mean? So our commitment to stay within that feeling is the process of how we continue to stay free, right? So how do we presume our power, presume the strategies for our freedom, and begin from that place? And that's how we get and stay free. Thank you.
Chris, could you pass the clicker?
Oh, clicker.
So I am what stands between us and the dialogue. Just want to acknowledge that for you all. But I'm going to do hopefully a truncated presentation. And then we will have we'll open up a conversation amongst the panelists across these incredibly rich contributions that cross-cut in so many ways, right? That I think hopefully is bubbling up for all of you. And then we'll have a good amount of time for us to engage with each other, right? Provoke each other. And so I am, bless you, going to be talking about my work with the Move Activist Archive. But before I do that, I want to start with what has served as a libation or a dedication as a way of opening up this space in this conversation. And so just a little bit of context for this. The first time that I spoke these words was at this very action, which was in June 2020, in the midst of Philadelphia's uprising. This was days after the start of the protests around the country after the murder of George Floyd. Here in the city of Philadelphia, we don't have to look to Minneapolis or look anywhere else to think about police terrorism. We can look to many places, including Osage Avenue, which is pictured here. And at 6221 Osage Avenue, the Philadelphia police on May 13th, 1985, dropped 2 bombs, burned down 61 homes, and murdered 11 people. The second time I stated what we're going to sort of do a dedication to in just a moment, the second time was down the street at 34th and Spruce on April 28th, 2021, which was the first public protest after the shocking revelation that 2 professors at the University of Pennsylvania had been holding hostage the remains of at least 2 Black girls who were murdered on May 13th, 1985, Delisha Africa and Tree Africa. And so, get into that in just a moment, but first and foremost, I want to acknowledge the lives, this legacy that is a part of the heritage of this institution, West Philadelphia, and a part of a debt that can never be repaid, but that is nevertheless owed. So what I would like is for us to take a moment to reflect. The lives of 11 people, 5 children and 6 adults were taken at 6221 Osage Avenue on May 13th, 1985. Before we leave this place, we must say their names. The children whose lives should have been protected. Tree Africa, 14 years old. Netta Africa, 12 years old. Delisha Africa, 13 years old. Little Phil Africa, 12 years old. Tomasa Africa, 9 years old. The adults whose lives should have been respected. I should say Tomaso, pardon me. Rhonda Africa. Teresa Africa. Frank Africa. Raymond Africa. Conrad Africa. And John Africa. Talk about the problem of talking heritage without naming the literal skeleton in the closet. We also can't talk about the many forms of resistance, memory work, and community power that are part of these movements without also acknowledging MOVE's legacy and ongoing practice. And so I'm here in my capacity as part of the MOVE Activist Archive, where I am helping to build, which I am helping to build alongside Mike Africa Jr., who is a 2nd-generation MOVE member, other MOVE members, cultural workers, and cultural institutions. And so for those of you who may not have heard of MOVE, which if you're here in Philadelphia, if you haven't, that is something you need to very quickly remedy. MOVE is a Black revolutionary back to nature organization that was founded in 1972, recently celebrated 50 years. When we talk about Black resistance in the city of Philadelphia and really in the nation and around the world, MOVE is a part of that important legacy. Many people know about MOVE through the acts of state violence against the organization, which resulted in the incarceration of 9 political prisoners who came to be known as the MOVE 9 after the August 8th, 1978 siege of the MOVE's first headquarters just down the street, actually, at 33rd and Powelton. You may also know about MOVE because of the bombing of MOVE on May 13th, 1985, which resulted in the destruction of 2 city blocks and the murders of the individuals that we just said their names. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the process of creating the MOVE archive as a counter archive, which I think offers us many lessons about the irreparability of institutional harms at Penn and beyond, but also how we must look to communities, everyday people, those who are most impacted, for precious practices of preservation, memory work, and resistance. So the MOVE Activist Archive, just to give you an overview of the work that we do, it works to preserve the organizational history and collective memory of the MOVE organization. The archive's creation is led by MOVE members in partnership with the West Philadelphia Cultural Alliance, which is the Paul Robeson House and Museum, and local Black activist researchers. The MOVE archive documents MOVE's revolutionary beliefs and resistance to state violence. And the long-term vision for the MOVE archive is to be a catalyst for transformative justice and a guide for radical struggle through archiving, storytelling, in learning around MOVE history and memory. And this is actually a working QR code, by the way, in case you want to keep up with us, email us, check us out. I'll just give you a moment to do that if you're interested, but also there are some tiny URLs, and we can come back to this slide in case you don't catch it before I move on to the next slide. All right, so I come to doing the MOVE archive work alongside the many people who have made this possible as a Black Philadelphian, as a scholar, and also a community member who, by the way, used to be a professor here at this institution, but in part because of the very things I'm talking about, opted to leave. But 5 years ago, I helped establish a project called Remember Black Philadelphia, which thinks about and utilizes multimodal storytelling, community archive work, and collaboration to document and preserve Black Philadelphia memory, collective memories, sites of memory, and to also extend and support practices of cultural preservation among community members who on an everyday basis are working to preserve our community's memories. However, I've been a longtime MOVE supporter. As an organizer in the city, as someone who sort of grew up with the legacy of MOVE in the very DNA of the city and what it means to be a part of, to be a Philadelphian. But you may not know, underneath the stories of spectacular state violence against MOVE is that MOVE all along has been preserving its own history and telling its own story. And so on the left side of this panel, you see an incredibly important figure to what has made the MOVE Activist Archive possible, Louise James, who is a sister of John Africa, who is the founder of MOVE. She was an original MOVE member. It was actually her home that was bombed on May 13th, 1985, where she lost her son, Frank. And even though she left the MOVE organization before the bombing of MOVE, she was a minister of communication and information within the organization. And for decades, she worked tirelessly alongside other MOVE members to preserve MOVE's history, to tell MOVE's story, to write profusely about MOVE in a variety of different formats. And so what you're looking at on the left is sort of life history of John Africa in the MOVE organization that she originally wrote with her sister, Laverne Sims, in 1986, but that was released and sort of reformulated in 2013. And then what you're looking at on the right is 50 years on a MOVE, which is a text, both of these are texts that are widely available, but it is telling 50 years of MOVE's history. It was released in the lead up to the 50th anniversary last year. And it's actually a kind of continuation of an earlier version of MOVE telling its own story, 25 years on a MOVE, which was released on the organization's 25th anniversary. And so part of what I'm going to walk through just briefly is how we get to the point where we are building a MOVE archive and what that actually looks like. And in fact, it's, anyway, I'll get to that in a moment. So some other things that are part of the sort of context for how we get to a point where MOVE is telling its own story and building its own archive of organizational memory, a very important moment comes in 2017, where we have children at the Jubilee School proposing and winning a historic marker at 63rd in Cobbs Creek, the corner of Osage Avenue, to commemorate the MOVE bombing. 2017, 32 years after the bombing, is the first public monument we have in the city of Philadelphia to MOVE. And it was created by children who learned about MOVE and were so astonished that there was no public memory of MOVE that they decided to propose one themselves as elementary school children. And so what you're seeing on the right side of the panel is two poems written by two students who were a part of the team that proposed the historic marker. And I think they are quite evocative in sort of making plain the violence, the trauma, and how clear and clearly important the history of MOVE and the bombing of MOVE is to how we understand West Philadelphia. And then I also included a quote here. Before, we got started on the MOVE Activist Archive as part of Remember Black Philadelphia, we collected oral histories at a screening of, funny enough, Louis Messiah, who is the director of Scribe, a screening of the bombing of Osage Avenue, which is a film he released, I think in 1986 or 1987, about the bombing in 1985. And this is a quote from an oral history we collected from an older woman who was a child when the bombing happened. And I'll just allow you to read that yourself just for the sake of time. But what I'm trying to point to here is that there were many sort of disjointed memory practices of people attempting to grapple with the wake of the bombing of MOVE. And then in 2018, this is Mike Africa Jr. here on the left, we organized a Black resistance tour of Philadelphia as part of the American Sociological Association meeting. We took a yellow bus around the city to sites of Black resistance. There were about a dozen stops from Center City, North Philly, West Philly, all over the city, South Philly. But the site that you see here is the site of the original headquarters of MOVE organization. And so this kind of started our collaborative work in thinking about what it looks like to grapple with this memory and the larger memory of Black resistance in Philadelphia collaboratively. But then a number of things happened that made this work even more possible. As I mentioned, members of the MOVE 9 were, after a confrontation and siege of the MOVE's original headquarters in 1978, 9 members of MOVE were sentenced to 40 to 100 years for the murder of a police officer, which was widely contested anyway, we won't get into the history of that, but and between 2018 and 2020, all 7 surviving members of the MOVE 9 were released from prison. 2 people died in prison, Merle Africa and Phil Africa. And Delbert Africa, who was the last person to be released in 2020, he transitioned less than 6 months after he was released from prison. And so now there are still 6 surviving members of the MOVE 9, but Mike Africa Jr. helped produce and is featured in a documentary called 40 Years a Prisoner, which you can watch and is an incredible documentary. And it documents his fight to free his parents, who are 2 members of the MOVE 9, and also his other family members. And then this is us, after MOVE 9 members are released, MOVE is able to redirect its energy from freeing its family members to thinking about its legacy and preserving its memory, which has always been a focus, in fact. And so you are looking here at an image of the archives, the archival materials, which Mike Africa Jr. inherited from his aunt, Louise James, who passed away in 2018 and left to him thousands of video cassettes of MOVE events, prison letters, prison writings, legal documents, all kinds of ephemera that are related to MOVE's history. And so since then, we have been doing the work of sort of organizing these materials. What you're looking at on the right is materials that actually survived the bombing in 1985. And anyway, I'll kind of breeze through this and come to a close, but there's an intersection of MOVE's activism, but also ongoing Black resistance and the collective memory work that MOVE has had to do by necessity to, one, try to free its members, but also to commemorate and to honor the lives that were lost ever since the bombing of MOVE in 1985. And this is an image from the action I mentioned at the beginning, right across the street after we found out about the holding hostage of the remains of 2 MOVE children, which there is still much accountability to be had for there. And we can talk about that later. This is us marching up Spruce Street, just there. Mike and I did a live oral history interview where I interviewed him in front of the president's house right up the street, and really talked about, not just the deaths and the ongoing violence, but the lives that they led that need to be remembered. And this is a very clear way that in a lot of our resistance practices, our protest practices, memory work is embedded within. Mm-hmm. And this is the May 13th, 2021 action, which, and you see Chris there, yeah. A bunch of people there. And we are sort of retelling the story of what happened on May 13th, 1985 in this moment. This is us walking up Osage Avenue and stopping in front of 6221 Osage Avenue and saying the names of all of those who died, but also survived. There were 2 survivors, Ramona Africa and Birdie Africa, who has since passed away. But the thing I want to leave us with, and this is where I'll stop, one of the things that Mike Africa Jr. always says, and this has become a key part of our praxis at the MOVE Activist Archive, and I think this is something for us to hold on and put into this conversation here. Number 1, we, Black folks, Black community members, organizers, we tell our own stories. And if we don't tell our own stories, we steward the process of telling our own stories. And if we don't tell our own stories or steward the process of telling our own stories, we protest it. Gone are the days where people get to tell our own stories, or cut us out and erase us from the process of telling our own stories. And so this is the end of my presentation of some of the work we're doing with the MOVE Activist Archive. I want to now transition to, thank you. I want to now transition to a broader conversation, and I prepared a few questions for our panel, but we also want to hear from you all. We also want to be in conversation with you all. And so I had 4 questions, but I'm going to turn those into 2 questions so we can get to the conversation more quickly. But the key themes that I think come up in this work and in these contributions and in our conversation today thus far is stories, community, resistance, and action. And so I want to start with some conversation about community and stories. We see across every single contribution that has been made today that stories are essential. Documenting stories, telling stories, and creating counter narratives is essential to all the work that we do. And I would love it if we could take some time to talk about the role of counter narratives in telling stories to our work, whether it's in the fight to save the townhomes or in the various documentary projects that you're a part of. Chris talked about some of this in the How We Stay Free anthology. Why is that important to the work? And also, what are the kinds of stories that you still want to see told? what stories do we still need to see told? So that's the story part. But then I want us to hold in close connection to the stories, community, right? We can't talk about heritage. We can't talk about preservation. We can't talk about culture and cultural practices without talking about community. And I'd love to hear you all connect this piece about stories to the communities that you hold dear. And so one way we could approach this is if you would like to offer a memory of West Philadelphia into this space that you hold dear as a way of kind of bringing our communities even more into this conversation. And so I will open it up, but the question is, stories, what stories are important to you? What stories do you think we need to tell and why? And also, who are your people, right? Is there a memory or a kind of beloved memory that you want to offer to this space to bring in your communities into this conversation? And so maybe, I don't know, Miss Maria, Miss Wanda, you want me to come back to you? Okay, go ahead then.
Okay, community, stories. Well, I have stories that go back when I was little. My mother is Lenape, and she would tell us different stories about staying together, that kind of thing, and making sure as family it was important. We even went to powwows where we would actually come together, and we would go to the powwows every year until the city of Philadelphia didn't want them there because of money. And we would go there, I think, for connection, because we didn't have it where we were, and to learn about some piece of ourselves, because we didn't have that opportunity in our house. And I love that as a story. Now, how that refers to where we are now is that coming together with us going through all of this stuff that's going on, the displacement and how we're all connected, and telling our stories to each other and comforting each other when they're going through things, when they can't handle. Sometimes we dabble into depression and stuff like that. Some of us are connected together so that we can help bring up or connect to let them know this is not your fight alone. We are in this together. That I learned that a lot from when I was little. So it's like passing it on, through family, through who we are connected with, either through our neighbors, our church. That to me is the story that connects with me. Through friends,
She pointed to you, Miss Wanda.
I just say community, you should stick together, because if you're all together, you got more power.
That is true.
I love that. Straight into the point.
And I'll give a shout out. Ms. Rhea spoke about the powwows. And if you go to scribe.org and go to the Precious Places Project, you'll find a documentary called Reclaiming Coaquinot, which I think was done in 2017, which talks to the story of the powwows in Philadelphia, and also how the ways in which they were interrupted and stopped, and the community of people that continue to fight for the presence of Native peoples in Philadelphia today. So go find that online. I think, one of the things, the story that comes for me in terms of like counter narratives, one of the things I often come back to is someone who really inspires me is Aimé Césaire. Find the Discourse of Colonialism, I think 1955 it was released. It's PDFs available all over online. I highly recommend everyone to read it. It is so incredibly relevant to today. But one of the, sentences that I always come back to, and I've been using it for years. He sort of says, my turn to state an equation. Colonization equals thingification. I hear the storm. They talk to me about progress, about achievements, diseases cured, improved standards of living. I am talking about societies drained of their essence, cultures trampled underfoot, institutions undermined, lands confiscated, religions smashed, magnificent artistic creations destroyed, extraordinary possibilities wiped out. And then I'll, kind of ellipsis and say, he'll say, I make a systematic defense of the societies destroyed by imperialism. It is such an important text. But when I think about counter narratives, it's about naming what gets lost and undermined with this idea of progress or growth or development. Like, for example, when we're talking about the UC Townhomes and saving the UC Townhomes, someone on Twitter replies back to me and says, well, why would you put residential in the middle of a research center? But this is the narrative they have been fed through the Inquirer business section and the Philadelphia Business Journal and Philadelphia Magazine and Richard Florida and the creative class. It's the idea that the profit, knowledge economy, innovation, that sort of like is more worthy than the power of community, right? And this university is deep in it, deep in it. It's no coincidence to me that in the same year that the developer Altman says I can make $100 million, that Penn also releases a whole campaign that's saying we want to invest $750 million into life sciences and research labs and knowledge innovation because we know that we need more of that in the local economy, right? Those things are connected. That's not a coincidence. And there's a whole probably 4 buildings that are continue to do that work right now as we talk. So when we think about counter narratives, it's about lifting up those contradictions, but also cherishing the power of community, right? In an everyday way. So one of the places I'll probably go this week, well, I'll be meeting with Miss Yvonne this weekend, is Akeem's bookstore. Black-owned bookstore, 52nd and Walnut, the oldest Black bookstore in Pennsylvania, one of the oldest continuously operating Black bookstores in the country. And the conversations that you have in that store are full of this content. And for that, they have an FBI record and have been, continue to find ways where they have been undermined. But that's the importance of why we do this counter narrative work.
Would you like to add? I don't know if I can add any,
Even around just like stories that you
stories that
are prioritizing.
Cool. So let me put the word in community. So being in community, one of the projects that I'm working on, which was mentioned when I was introduced, and it's an unfinished project because of life's ups and downs. Hope to get to it, to keep my commitment to finish it. But it's Black Catholics in various spaces, and particularly in community space that I did the research and collected the data on is St. Malachy. So that's one of the stories. I think that story needs to be told. It needs to be told so people understand how that diverse community work together. So I think that's important because it's a diverse community and there's collaborative work that went on. Not that everything was peachy now, because they also live in society. So there's those conflicting behaviors that comes from being in society that then has an impact. Or you go to regroup or rejuvenate your spirit in your community. So those are the type of stories I think, like, Because I think that's what's affecting young people today. We're in a glorification mode, right? The glorification mode. There are those of us who know what it means to be in community. Our children don't. And it's what we see.
Thank you for that. So I just want to ask one final question, and then we have some time to engage with each other here. And coming back to resistance in action, right? I think obviously a whole campaign and movement to save the townhomes is a very clear form of resistance. You know, Chris, the work that the anthology brought together, and certainly Police Free Penn is also a very obvious form of resistance. And certainly kind of documentary work, storytelling work is a form of resistance as well. And I'd love to uplift what you all have learned through your work about resistance and how it perhaps has transformed you, or even, you know, the possibilities that resistance in the various forms that your work takes holds in terms of shifting the relationships that exist between institutions and communities. So again, like, what have you learned from resistance about being in community, right? About the way we can engage or not engage with institutions like Penn? That's one question about resistance. But then I want to ask a very practical, straightforward, and important question about action. What is to be done, right? With all of the different kinds of harms, dislocations that you all have brought up today through displacement, through, you know, cultural institutions and practices that don't exist in the same way that they've existed before, in movements and struggles, right? What does repair look like? If it looks like anything, and what is Penn and other institutions' responsibility? So the one question is resistance. What have you learned about resistance in terms of what it means for community? And then the next question is, what do folks need to do? What does this institution need to do that can put us all on the hook here? Because we are all on the hook. So
you talk about resistance?
Resistance and then action.
Okay, resistance. More people need to be a part of it.
Right.
Because the thing is, if something is wrong, or for this example, the stuff that we're going through, Altman has decided to not, or preserve it. He didn't take into account of how it was going to affect the people that were living there.
Mhm.
Right.
If the community, well, that's the reason why you have resistance from not just us, but the community, because we are a part of that community.
Yeah.
And when everybody doesn't partake in that, then he takes over and does what he wants to do. And when you were talking about progress has good and negative stuff. If the progress inhibits the community, right, it's no longer progress. Right. It is the destruction of progress and humanity. Right. And what happened is that is what is going on now. I believe that the idea of humanity and progress is disrupting the whole, or dismantling the whole part of humanity, community. And I don't know, I'm assuming they know this already, and that the whole purpose was to do that, to dismantle and dispart, because they did the same thing with the Native Americans. Right. They moved them from where they were. They weren't bothering anyone. They were living their life, and they helped immigrants that came over to the land. And as a result, they were disrupted. They were torn apart. Children, yeah, thank you. You know, anyway, this is what's going on now. This only on a modern level. You know, not on a primitive level, on a more modern level. And that is what the community or the ones who are what they call sleepers aren't aware of, or are not willing to open their minds to. So resistance would mean all of the people who believe what a community is needs to be a part of that, because what's going to end up happening is that the other part, or what do you call the people who have the money, are going to take over and push out the community, dismember everybody and put them wherever they want, or fraction the children. It isn't stuff. I'm all over the place, but the thing is that it doesn't. Their purpose is to dismantle. Is to because the children are right now in a place where they're fine. When you dismantle that, you mess with their head, their thinking, their way of how unity is. And if it's not taught by the adults or the community, then it continues to be fractured. Community needs to come together and see it for what it is and attack that part to keep it. Because if it isn't important to you, it's not going to stay important. It's going to be split apart. You're going to end up being lost, for lack of a better word. So resistance is very, to me, is very important to keep your heredity, to keep your way of life, to keep community together. Because all of it is a learning piece, except for the people who want to take over. And by not resisting it, you're allowing that to happen. You're allowing to say, oh, it's okay, or closing your blind eye to it. It doesn't affect me directly, but eventually it will. And is that when you wake up, when it affects you directly? And then by that time, too much damage is done. Not that you can't help, but the thing is it should be done when it was first addressed. And then that way it would have never gotten to this level, to me. That's not.
Don't want to add anything, Ms. Wanda?
She said no.
You did say it all. So resist is a stand. And always recognize, because we are in comfort spaces, and being in comfort spaces, we think nothing can happen, not knowing that someone is watching for opportunity. So it's like, how do we raise our awareness? And it's not just us indigenous or African American, it's everyone, because out of all of this, everyone gets hurt. Recognize.
And the children are the most ones that get hurt.
Yes.
Yes. And their response. That's what we want to see.
Any final words or contributions you want to add on?
Nah, I'll talk to people at lunch.
Okay. Well, any questions and comments you have is what is standing between us and lunch. Window, so we still have some time here. And so let's just open the floor. Please, I know you've had your hand up for some time.
I worked at the Penn Museum for 5 years. I'm a Jamaican Latino freedom fighter. I believe the problem with the townhousing right now is that we can't reflect on our equity. The reason why we can't destroy the townhouses because our equities in these neighborhoods. It displaces the places that in neighborhoods that we don't know anything about. Because we can reflect on our ancestry. I tell the kids every day at the Academy Museum, 100 kids, that actually is wrong. Your neighborhood is what makes you rich in knowledge, emotion, feeling. Like I'm a Jamaican Latino. They don't know that there's a Spanish town in Jamaican, right? So I go to all the Spanish towns anyway, right? If you go into the Italian neighborhood, you can't really reflect that much because you're not really Italian, like South Philly, right? Because I forgive me for saying Rizzo, I know he's a cop, but I'm saying he was actually honest about that. Like I'm also Catholic. The reason why they can't relate to it, because that's not what they are. So keeping displacing people in situations where they can't get out. So they stay poor all their life. So like I told all my kids at the Academy Museum, if y'all really want to get up in head, think about people that are talking about equity and ethnicity. And then you win in life. When you don't, you get displaced for years, homelessness, shelterlessness, abandonment, abuse, and confusion, and you don't know what's going on. My name is Peter Costa. Work for Obama, work for Michelle, and work for Oprah Winfrey. You told me that was true. And thanks a lot. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Any other? The floor is yours now. Comments, questions, contributions, please.
I almost hesitate to bring this up, but it just has me thinking a lot about the kind of tension between these grand narratives, you know, and especially the ways in which they kind of retroactively overwrite, you know, local histories and that kind of thing. Like, you know, when you talk about progress and that idea that, you know, it's a way of reframing this whole destructive, you know, process into one that, and it becomes it becomes really easy to focus on it. and I think that I keep wondering about how to maintain that tension between the grand narratives, right? And locating things in, I love why this is called presence, you know, presence and the difference between conversation and narrative or something like that. So, you know, and I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that, about how discourse gets, you know, when it becomes that framing narrative, it's a different thing than community discourse, really. And I don't know, I think that theoretically those things get slippery and they kind of slip into one another. And I would love to think more about how to resist that kind of, you know, elision, basically. But
yes. Yeah, I got something on this, or should we take it? I thank you for that, because I think one of the things that it reminds me of, amazing essay that I know probably has at this point been in a lot of, you know, curriculums, The White Savior Industrial Complex from Teju Cole. It's still up on at Atlantic, and you can read it. If it's not behind a paywall now, we can talk about that later. All right. And one of the things he says, right, is like the white savior supports brutal policies in the morning, founds charities in the afternoon, and receives awards in the evening, right? And you see it, you feel it at Penn, right? You feel that, right? One of the things that you talk about, like narratives, right? And the idea of like, we got this whole monument, rethinking monument stuff going on. And it's fool's gold to me at some point, right? When you have this wealthy white person buy a $700,000 Simone Leigh sculpture and say, oh, we're going to put this on the corner at 34th and Walnut. And then you have Amy Gutman, who's like using this as a symbol to say, look, we've dealt with our racist past, as if it is past and is not sort of still caught up in a present structure of oppressing its community, not just this community, but the type of research projects that come out of Penn are also supporting oppression of communities all over the world. We've not dealt with that. But you can buy a sculpture, put it on the corner, and have this big emotional, you know, play about it and say, look at what we're doing. And that's how the narratives and the symbolism begin to play in and creep in to our feelings. So I think about that and how we need to be attuned to what we're being sold, right? Around what reckoning looks like. And think about the communities that are at the center of that remain victimized and the types of visions that they have for what reparative action looks like. You know, rather than thinking it's going to come from the mouth of, I don't know, Liz McGill or, oh, well, I guess John Jackson's the new provost now, so maybe he'll take it up next week and he's Black, so I guess it might land better. I don't know, but that's what we're going through.
No. I know we had a comment or question here, and maybe we can take them together.
Basically related to what's been said, who gets to write the headlines? So what you've presented is a whole different side of University City Townhouses issue that has not really hit the papers or hit the, the common news sources. And also I forgot to mention James Baldwin when you were asking for names of people.
Oh, great, yes, thank you. He's one that came up with Negro removal. Shout out to Coltrane.
I didn't have a question so much as a comment. One thing that I was originally going to say is I wanted to highly encourage people to, there was a GoFundMe set up to support the residents of the UC Townhomes, to support medical costs, transportation costs. I would highly encourage people that have the means and ability to donate to it, because being displaced, facing potential eviction, things like that, it costs a lot of money, especially when a lot of folks are elderly, single mothers, have various disabilities. And you can, if you have Instagram, you can go to the Save UC Townhomes Instagram page, and the GoFundMe link is in the bio. That's something that people could do literally right now, and that it would be incredibly helpful. I also, sorry, I'll be very quickly, but I wanted to respond to the some comments about like the grand narratives, and how, when other little narratives are how to counter the grand narratives or whatever. I wanted to give a shout out to the Townhomes residents and a lot of the student organizers that in some ways, in order to counter those grand narratives, you can just look to the convocation action that happened on August 29th of last year, where Liz McGill came in, and that convocation, it's, to welcome students, but it's also to kind of indoctrinate freshmen into this ideology of Penn, and to like, so Liz McGill could spout her thing about how this, use of university care is about, various students, who might exist on the margins or whatever. And they could say how they care about those students and how they care about the community and all this other stuff, and get students to trick students into believing that. And a way to disrupt that is to literally disrupt when those speeches are happening. So, which is exactly what happened. She couldn't give that speech. So, and instead students were taught about what's happening at the UC Townhomes. So some, panels and conversations are one way to disrupt those grand narratives, or to get people to learn about the other narratives, but disrupting the literal places and speeches where that like indoctrination and those grand narratives are shared is another way to do it.
And those students were criminalized and sent to discipline proceedings. And so also it's also about standing up for when those moments happen, that we have those folks back, right? And that we're standing with them. Thanks, Kay. That was great.
Do you want to make any comments on the questions?
So she said, thank you, Kat.
No, I know, I'm just asking you.
I'll just plug some fundraisers.
Okay, there's one more. No, Miss
Makes me mad now.
I mean, there's a lot to be enraged about around the UC Townhomes. The fight has been in the streets, but being in the streets actually put pressure to force certain kinds of conversations. And for the past year, we have had multiple conversations with Penn that didn't go very far, honestly. We met with last year, Wendell Pritchett, when he was interim provost, or president, excuse me. And, you know, it was a lot of listening, seeming to listen, and we'll get back to you, right? And then, you know, and I think there's something here about the way folks who are protecting the structure use dialogue as a way to co-opt and to demobilize. That happened and is happening with Penn, right? The president of Penn, the new president, has refused to meet with Townhomes residents despite promising to do so, right? The demands are very clear. And, you know, the position has been, well, this is not our problem, right? But Penn is part of the reason why Altman thinks he can sell for $100 million, is it not? Right? And same thing with Jamie Gauthier, right? Someone who is sort of playing a game, honestly, of wanting to appear to be on the side of residents. In fact, you know, in many ways, Jamie has been standing in the way of certain kinds of action being possible. And then a couple of months ago, she announced a plan called the People's Platform, which is a complete co-optation of the language of the People's Townhomes, when her office is not doing nearly enough to support the townhomes residents. And so I think those are both instances of the ways that dialogue and sort of playing a long game of waiting out resistance is at work here at the University of Pennsylvania. And also, Penn is a collaborator with Altman, literally. Penn is a collaborator with politicians, literally, right? And so right now, part of what is happening is that many residents, like Ms. Maria said earlier, have been forced to leave because of the threat of eviction. Many residents are committed to staying until. And many of them, even if they wanted to leave, they can't find adequate housing, right? And so that is happening, which is why the GoFundMe becomes important, because that is about sustaining the people who are still fighting. And this is a fight that has implications for dozens of other properties that are going to go through the very same thing in the next couple of years, right? What happens at the townhomes is going to tell us a lot about what's going to happen across the city, right? But then in addition to that, the city is in the middle of a settlement process with Altman, where they are going to be determining what happens to the townhomes. And right now, the residents are not a part of that process. So the people who are most impacted are cut out of the process, just like they've been cut out of the process. Till today, Altman has still refused to meet with the residents, right? And so that is where the fight is. We are not going to stop until they're going to have to drag us out of there. But, you know, despite appearances, despite statements, Penn is not doing what it could do with its influence. Neither are local politicians. So let's just be very clear about that. And so, did you have a hand? Go ahead. And the president, leave her a message as well. And also, I believe the rally and press conference, it may still be happening. It started at 11.
The sit-in's still going on over at 32nd.
Well,
and
and
Chestnut.
also the sit-in is ongoing.
A lot of
So
great
there
activities
are
too.
people- Pardon?
I said there's a lot of great activities at the sit-in.
Right. What I was gonna say, if there are people who are interested, you can grab a lunch to go and we can go over there right now. 32nd and Chestnut, correct?
Yeah, for sure. It might be better than the next panel. Sorry.
Well, it's not until 1:30.
No.
1:30, so it's just a short walk.
There's time to go and come back. Let's leave it on that and call to action and give it up for our incredible first panel.